The Mexican Mafia, or La EMI, is one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations in the world, built on loyalty, survival, and ruthless ambition. Behind its notorious reputation are a few legendary figures, men whose violent rise to power and lasting influence shaped La EMI into an empire that stretches far beyond prison walls. In this video, we'll dive into the top 9 most dangerous members of the original Mexican Mafia, exploring the actions and decisions that made them legends in the criminal underworld. These are the men whose names still command fear and respect today. Number 9. Rafael Cisco Munoz Gonzalez. Rafael Cisco. Munoz Gonzalez is a name that resonates through the criminal world, particularly within the infamous Mexican Mafia. A figure of power and control, he was a high-ranking member who commanded the Puente 13 Street Gang, a group that has long been under the influence of the Mexican Mafia. Born in La Puente, California, Cisco's rise to prominence within the gang world was marked by ruthless leadership and a determination to expand his criminal empire. His influence stretched across La Puente and neighboring areas, such as Hacienda Heights, Walnut, and West Covina, and his reach even extended to rival territories. Cisco's criminal activities were varied and violent, and he was deeply involved in illegal enterprises that included extortion, racketeering, and the trafficking of illicit substances, particularly methamphetamine. Under his leadership, Puente 13 became a force to be reckoned with, known for its brutal methods of maintaining control over drug trade routes. Cisco's ability to manipulate and direct his associates allowed him to operate with an iron grip, using violence and intimidation to ensure that his gang members paid tribute or taxes for working in gang-controlled areas. One of the most notorious incidents tied to Cisco's criminal career occurred in 2009 when he ordered a brutal assault on a witness cooperating with federal authorities in a high-profile investigation. This attack, which took place in the Federal Detention Center in downtown Los Angeles, involved a savage beating and multiple stabbings that left the victim with serious injuries, including a punctured lung and fractured skull. This act was part of Cisco's broader strategy to prevent cooperation with law enforcement, a tactic that helped him maintain control and avoid being implicated in crimes. In addition to his violent actions, Cisco was instrumental in overseeing the day-to-day operations of Puente 13, even while incarcerated. Before his release in 2007, Cisco's brother, Cesar Blanco Munoz Gonzalez, took over many of his duties, trafficking large quantities of illicit substances and handling the gang's finances. While Cisco was behind bars, his influence did not wane. His associates continued to operate under his orders, collecting tribute from local illicit dealers and ensuring that his territory remained protected. The brothers, in partnership with other gang members, were able to amass significant wealth, as evidenced by their acquisition of luxury items like custom boats and high-end vehicles. The federal authorities eventually caught up with Cisco and his brother, resulting in a sweeping investigation into the Puente 13 gang. Number 8. Robert Hinojos. Robert Hinojos, known by the street moniker Dopey, is a notorious figure with deep ties to the Mexican Mafia, one of the most feared and influential criminal organizations in Southern California. His criminal journey began at the age of 19 when he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, his time behind bars would shape him into a significant player within the gang world. Over the years, Hinojos expanded his influence, first as an associate of the Brown Nation Gang, a small Latino group based in Paramount, and later as a prominent figure within the Mexican Mafia itself. Hinojos quickly earned a reputation in prison for his ability to generate money for powerful figures in the Mexican Mafia. His role involved collecting illicit funds from various sources, particularly from drug dealers and other gangs. As the organization controlled numerous prison operations and street rackets, his skills as a reliable earner made him a sought-after ally. By the time he was released from prison in December 2015, After serving 15 years for the robbery and additional charges related to smuggling contraband, he had solidified his standing in the criminal underworld. A significant turning point came in May 2016, when Hinojos became involved in the killing of Hector Velázquez, a man with ties to the 155th Street gang in Compton. This event would define Hinojos' rise within the Mexican Mafia. According to testimonies during his trial, Hinojos was working to settle a $10,000 debt, a routine task that ultimately led to Velázquez's death. The execution of Velázquez was a cold and calculated act, not driven by personal animosity, but as part of Hinojos' efforts to secure a higher position within the Mexican Mafia. The murder was seen as a strategic move, granting Hinojos the authority to collect from both street and prison-based operations. In the weeks following the incident, Hinojos' words and actions suggested his deepening ties with the Mexican Mafia. A conversation recorded from a jail phone call revealed that he had been offered a promotion, a coded reference to his induction into the organization. This was corroborated by the testimony of Renee Enriquez, a former high-ranking member of the Mexican Mafia who helped interpret these veiled messages. Enriquez suggested that the promotion referred to Hinojos' membership in the Mexican Mafia, which was a coveted position of power and control. Despite his criminal activities, Hinojos' ascent was not without consequence. His incarceration in 2016 for his involvement in Velázquez's death and other alleged crimes led to a lengthy trial. The case brought to light the workings of the Mexican Mafia, particularly the clica system, a collection racket that Hinojos had taken over after a dispute within the organization. However, the full extent of Hinojos' influence was not fully understood until investigators delved deeper into his communications from jail. Further revelations pointed to his connections to other violent acts and his willingness to employ extreme measures to maintain control over territories and people. Hinojos' criminal network extended beyond prison walls. At the time of his trial, authorities suspected him of orchestrating a string of illicit activities from behind bars. The prosecution argued that he was heavily involved in trafficking illicit substances and managing criminal enterprises, using his position in the Mexican Mafia to control lucrative markets. His ability to operate from jail, through coded phone calls and messages, underscored his dangerous influence. Number 7. Castron, Daryl. Daryl Castron, a name closely linked to the notorious Mexican Mafia, or La M.A., was a high-ranking figure within the criminal organization. His involvement in the gang began in the early 1990s, and he quickly gained a reputation for his ruthlessness and strategic thinking. Castron's criminal activities were diverse, ranging from orchestrating illicit ventures to commanding acts of violence. His ability to manipulate situations from behind the scenes made him a dangerous and influential member of the Mexican Mafia, often pulling the strings from the shadows. Castron's criminal career reached a critical point in 2005 when he was arrested alongside 3 others for conspiring to take out Frankie Buelna, a fellow Mexican Mafia member. The plot, which was ultimately thwarted by law enforcement, stemmed from Buelna's supposed encroachment on Pomona neighborhoods without permission from La M. The operation to eliminate Buelna, believed to be orchestrated by Castron, was a telling reflection of the inner workings of the Mexican Mafia, where power struggles often escalate to violent consequences. Castron was identified as the shot caller in the plot, the individual who directs and oversees such dangerous actions. Despite the authorities' intervention, Buelna was later found dead in 2006, gunned down in a local bar, though the connection between Castron's plot and the actual crime remained uncertain. Castron's influence and position in the Mexican Mafia were significant, and his criminal record was equally vast. He had been involved in numerous illicit activities over the years, often linked to narcotic trafficking, extortion, and violent acts carried out by the gang. The Mexican Mafia, a highly organized and ruthless criminal syndicate, exerted control over much of the prison system and urban areas of Southern California, and Castron was deeply embedded in these operations. His capacity to manage illegal businesses, enforce discipline, and direct violence contributed to his feared reputation within the gang. However, in early 2007, Castron's criminal path took a dramatic turn. Despite facing serious charges for his involvement in the 2005 conspiracy, including accusations of orchestrating the assassination plot, Castron posted a $1 million bail, seemingly ensuring his release. But just days before he was scheduled to appear in court on charges related to the manslaughter conspiracy, Castron disappeared without a trace. His last known interactions were with his attorney and his wife, who initially believed that he had been detained by federal agents. However, authorities later confirmed that he was not in custody, leaving his whereabouts unknown. Castron's disappearance became the subject of intense scrutiny, with prosecutors and law enforcement unable to definitively determine whether he was hiding within the state, out of the country, or even deceased. His failure to appear in court on January 27, 2007, prompted a judge to revoke his bail and issue a no-bail warrant for his arrest. The case was further complicated when Castron missed another court appearance in connection to an illicit substance case in San Bernardino County. At the time, Castron had secured his bail by using his family's homes as collateral, and law enforcement believed that those properties might eventually be seized due to his flight from justice. The fact that Castron managed to evade law enforcement for as long as he did speaks to the level of skill and resources he had at his disposal. His disappearance remains an enduring mystery till date. Number 6. Marquez, Jose A. Bat. Jose A. Bat. Marquez was a notorious figure within the Mexican Mafia, an organization known for its widespread criminal activities across California and beyond. His journey into the depths of organized crime began in his youth in San Diego, where he was initially involved in street gangs before eventually aligning himself with the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M.A. As an enforcer for the cartel, Bat quickly gained a reputation for his ruthless tactics and willingness to engage in violent acts to enforce the will of the Mafia. Born in San Diego, Marquez was entrenched in the tough neighborhood culture from an early age. His criminal record began stacking up in his teens, starting with charges for theft, battery, and burglary. By the time he was 20, he was arrested for drug-related offenses and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. However, his life behind bars only hardened his resolve to climb the ranks of the Mexican Mafia. In prison, Marquez became a loyal member of the Sureños, a faction within the Mexican Mafia. He was soon involved in more serious criminal enterprises, including orchestrating and carrying out violent acts against rivals and enemies of the organization. In the early 1990s, Marquez played a key role in the Mexican Mafia's operations, which spanned both inside and outside the prison system. He used his position to exert control over narcotic trafficking, extortion, and violent enforcement actions. Marquez and his associates were responsible for a string of coordinated operations that targeted rivals, enemies. His reputation was solidified when he ordered the brutal punishment of members who had crossed the organization, making it clear that there would be severe consequences for disobedience. One of the most well-known events tied to Marquez's criminal activities was his involvement in the manslaughter of a man named Christopher Garcia in 1991, a crime carried out by his associates on his orders. In the years that followed, Marquez's criminal empire expanded as he continued to work with various cartels, including the Arellano Felix cartel in Mexico. His influence spread across the border, and he became one of the key players in the Mexican Mafia's international operations. Marquez's work with the cartel included overseeing illicit substance distribution and organizing various enforcement operations that targeted anyone who threatened the cartel's interests. By the late 1990s, Marquez's actions had drawn the attention of law enforcement agencies both in the U.S. and Mexico. Despite being a wanted fugitive, he continued his criminal activities, operating from Tijuana and overseeing several violent operations. One of the most significant incidents linked to Marquez occurred in 1997 when he was part of a team that ambushed and wounded a journalist who had exposed the cartel's activities, further solidifying his image as a dangerous and highly influential member of the Mexican Mafia. His criminal activities finally caught up with him when he was arrested in Mexico in 2003, after being on the run for several years. Following a protracted legal battle, Marquez was extradited to the United States in 2007, where he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for his role in orchestrating a range of criminal acts, including trafficking illicit substances and commanding violent actions on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. Today, Jose "Bet" Marquez remains incarcerated at ADX Florence in Colorado, where he continues to serve his sentence. Number 5. Joseph Morgan. Joseph Red. Morgan, born Joseph Medjugorje on April 10, 1929, in San Pedro, California, was one of the most notorious and influential figures in the history of the Mexican Mafia, also known as La IME. Morgan's early life was marked by adversity and conflict. The youngest of 4 children, he grew up in a neighborhood dominated by Mexican and Croatian immigrants, which exposed him to a mix of cultures and criminal influences. As a teenager, he joined the Ford Maravilla Street Gang, one of Los Angeles' oldest and most notorious. Morgan's criminal career began at a young age. At just 17, he was involved in a violent incident where he took the life of his girlfriend's husband and then buried the body in a shallow grave. While awaiting trial, he escaped from custody and was recaptured shortly after. This incident marked the beginning of his long history with the criminal justice system. Morgan was sentenced to prison, where his reputation started to take shape. By the late 1950s, after being paroled, Morgan continued his criminal activities, including an armed robbery in 1956 that saw him take a substantial amount of money from a bank. He was once again incarcerated, but during his time in various correctional facilities, he began to gain respect within the prison gang scene. His fluency in Spanish and his ability to bridge gaps between ethnic groups in the criminal world allowed him to connect with members of the Mexican Mafia, despite not being of Mexican descent. This made Morgan the first non-Mexican American to become a member of La IME, a rare and significant feat. Morgan's influence within the Mexican Mafia grew steadily throughout the 1960s and 1970s. He earned the nickname Peg Leg after losing a leg, but that did not diminish his power. Instead, it seemed to add to his mystique. Morgan was known for his strategic thinking and ability to form alliances with other gangs, including the Aryan Brotherhood, in the face of mutual enemies like the Black Guerrilla family. His efforts to build these alliances helped the Mexican Mafia expand its influence far beyond the prison walls, spreading its reach into neighborhoods, illegal operations, and even connections with major criminal organizations outside the United States. One of the most notorious events linked to Morgan was the first street execution carried out by the Mexican Mafia in Los Angeles in 1971. This marked a turning point in the gang's operations, signaling a shift from behind-the-bars intimidation to broader, more violent street-level activity. Morgan's ability to orchestrate such a high-profile event showed his leadership and unrelenting nature when it came to maintaining control and settling scores. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Morgan's power within La IME only grew as he helped manage the distribution of illicit substances, including cocaine and other controlled substances, and oversaw operations that stretched from California to Mexico. His ties to the Los Angeles crime family further cemented his status as a formidable force in the world of organized crime. However, Morgan's criminal activities eventually caught up with him. In the 1980s, he was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted for his role in trafficking firearms and other criminal enterprises. Despite his incarceration, Morgan remained a dominant figure within the Mexican Mafia, continuing to wield influence over its operations from behind bars. His network of alliances, as well as his ability to command respect even from fellow criminals, kept him at the top of the criminal hierarchy for years. In the early 1990s, Morgan's health began to deteriorate, and in 1993, he was diagnosed with inoperable liver cancer while serving a life sentence at California State Prison, Corcoran. His wife requested his release on compassionate grounds, but Morgan passed away on November 9, 1993, just days before the release process could begin. Number 4. Benjamin Peters. Benjamin Topo. Peters is a name synonymous with the brutal inner workings of the Mexican Mafia, a gang notorious for its control over the prison system and its extensive criminal influence in the streets of California. Born and raised in Southern California, Peters rose through the ranks to become one of the highest-ranking members of La E-Me, the Mexican Mafia, a gang with its roots deep in the violent culture of both the streets and the prison system. Peters' affiliation with the Mexican Mafia dates back to the early 1980s, a time when the gang was beginning to solidify its control over the California prison system. His involvement with the gang began with the Maravilla Street Gang in East Los Angeles, which eventually became aligned with the Mexican Mafia. Over time, Peters earned a reputation for his ruthlessness and strategic mind, climbing to a leadership position within the organization. He was seen not just as a soldier, but as a key figure in the gang's leadership, helping to extend its reach beyond the prison walls into local communities, particularly in the Los Angeles area. His criminal activities ranged from extortion to illicit substance distribution, always maintaining a tight grip over the operations that generated wealth for the gang. One of his most significant and dangerous roles was overseeing the operations of several violent associates who were tasked with carrying out the gang's business in both prison and on the streets. Peters was known for being involved in multiple violent incidents, including organizing and executing attacks against other inmates and rival gang members. His involvement in the stabbing of Mexican Mafia leader Salvador Monbuenrostro at the Los Angeles County Jail in 1991 is one of the most infamous incidents associated with his criminal career. Along with his associate Renee Enriquez, Peters played a direct role in the attack on Buenrostro, who was stabbed 26 times in an internal power struggle within the Mexican Mafia. This event highlighted the violent, often deadly power plays within the gang, where betrayal and shifting loyalties could result in brutal retribution. Peters' influence extended to the manipulation of gang operations from within the prison system. The Mexican Mafia's control over the prison system allowed figures like Peters to orchestrate violent acts not just in retaliation, but as a way to maintain authority and discipline within the gang's ranks. His leadership was often marked by his ability to command loyalty through fear, using intimidation and violence as tools of governance. In 1998, federal authorities launched a massive investigation into the Mexican Mafia's operations, culminating in a sweeping indictment of 22 members and associates of the gang. Peters was among those charged under the Federal Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, a law designed to dismantle criminal enterprises. The indictment accused Peters of being one of the highest-ranking members of La E-Me, and he was charged with a range of serious crimes, including extortion and involvement in violent acts. The investigation revealed how the Mexican Mafia had extended its criminal operations from the prison system to the streets, with Peters at the center of many of these illicit activities. In 2000, after a lengthy trial, Peters was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 3. Boxer Enriquez. Renee Enriquez, born July 7, 1962 in Artesia, California, rose to become one of the most infamous figures in the history of the Mexican Mafia, a criminal organization deeply embedded in the prison system and influencing criminal activities across California. His early life was marked by rebellion and misdirection. Although he came from a middle-class family, Enriquez found himself drawn into a life of petty crime. By the time he was a teenager, he had joined the Artesia 13th Street gang, idolizing his older brother Mark, who initiated him into this world. This was just the beginning of a long and violent journey that would see him ascend to one of the highest ranks in La M, the Mexican Mafia. Enriquez's life of crime started in earnest during his teenage years. At just 12 years old, he was initiated into the Artesia 13 gang after enduring a violent initiation ritual, which involved a severe beating. By his early teens, he was already a frequent offender, involved in armed robberies and trafficking illicit substances. His time in juvenile detention was marked by escalating violence, but it was during his later years in prison that he would truly cement his legacy. At 19, Enriquez was incarcerated for a string of robberies, but it was in prison where he truly made his mark. He was introduced to the Mexican Mafia, or La M, while serving time at Duel Vocational Institution. His violent tendencies and willingness to carry out orders quickly caught the attention of the Mafia's leadership. Over the years, Enriquez rose through the ranks, becoming a made member in 1985. He was known for his ruthlessness, and he became infamous for his actions both inside and outside the prison system. He was involved in numerous incidents of violence, including orchestrating brutal assaults and even carrying out different assassinations. One of the most notorious stories from Enriquez's career involves the demise of Cynthia Gavaldan, a woman he believed was siphoning money from the Mafia's illicit operations. Enriquez ordered her execution, and she was assassinated on Christmas Eve in 1989. The event was just one in a long series of violent actions he orchestrated, including another assassination of a fellow gang member, David Gallegos, who had fled during a violent confrontation. Enriquez's ability to carry out these orders with precision earned him a reputation as one of the Mexican Mafia's most dangerous figures. Enriquez's rise in the organization was not without its challenges. In 1991, he was involved in an attack on Salvador Mon Buenrostro, another high-ranking member of the Mexican Mafia. The attack, which took place in a lawyer's interview room in the Los Angeles County Jail, left Buenrostro with multiple stab wounds, but ultimately did not terminate him. Despite this setback, Enriquez's status within the organization continued to grow, and by the late 1980s and early 1990s, he was deeply involved in extortion, narcotic trafficking, and controlling a network of street gangs that operated under the Mafia's orders. In the mid-1990s, Enriquez was transferred to Pelican Bay State Prison, where he was placed in solitary confinement due to his status as a high-ranking gang member. It was during this time that he began to question the values of the Mexican Mafia, particularly its increasing brutality and disregard for innocent lives. This was the turning point in his life. After witnessing the Mafia's involvement in the assassination of children and family members of disfavored gang members, Enriquez decided to defect. In 2003, he became a government informant, providing critical intelligence on the inner workings of the Mexican Mafia and its extensive criminal activities. His cooperation with law enforcement helped to bring down several Mafia operations and led to the arrest and conviction of numerous high-ranking members. Despite his cooperation, Enriquez faced ongoing threats from the Mexican Mafia, which viewed him as a traitor. He was placed under witness protection, but his criminal past continued to haunt him. In 2015, after a series of parole hearings, Enriquez expressed his remorse for the violent life he had led and his desire to prevent others from following in his footsteps. In 2022, after years of denied parole, Enriquez was granted release. His future remains uncertain, as he continues to live under the protection of the U.S. Marshals due to multiple threats from the Mexican Mafia gang. Number 2. Michael Torres. Michael Torres, a notorious member of the Mexican Mafia, was known for his deep involvement in criminal activities spanning from the streets of San Fernando to the controlled environments of California's correctional system. His rise through the ranks of the Mexican Mafia painted a grim picture of a dangerous and calculating individual whose actions impacted both the criminal world and law enforcement for decades. Born in San Fernando, Torres, also known by his nickname Mosca, became an influential figure within the Mexican Mafia after being sponsored by one of its founders, Luis Güero Buff Flores, in 1994, while incarcerated at Pelican Bay State Prison. Torres's criminal history stretches back to the early 1990s, when he served time for manslaughter and was released in the early 2000s. Once free, he became a key enforcer in the San Fernando Valley, where he took control of various illicit operations, including extortion and racketeering. He oversaw collections from gangs and businesses, taxing them for protection and services under the authority of the Mexican Mafia. In 2003, Torres's criminal activities escalated dramatically when he became involved in a violent dispute over an individual named Diablo, who had been claiming to be a member of the Mexican Mafia. Torres confronted Diablo at an apartment in North Hills, asking him to display his affiliation. When Diablo responded, Torres acted quickly, leading to a violent altercation. Later that night, two of Torres's associates, in an attempt to control the situation, kidnapped a fellow gang member who had allegedly betrayed him, subjecting him to brutal treatment. These incidents exemplified Torres's ruthless nature and his willingness to use violence to maintain control. Torres's influence extended well beyond the streets, as he took control of substantial operations inside California's largest county jails. From his prison cell, Torres managed to establish a powerful network that governed drug sales, prison extortion schemes, and organized activities across multiple facilities. He micromanaged operations using contraband communication devices, ensuring that a large portion of jail funds were directed into his hands. This system of control was maintained by a network of underlings who reported directly to Torres, with weekly sums collected from various jails and redistributed among his associates. The complexity of Torres's criminal operations was not limited to the jails, but extended to outside ventures, where he funneled money into legitimate businesses and real estate. His ability to manage both illegal and legal enterprises demonstrated a calculated and strategic mind. However, his extensive criminal network and unyielding thirst for power created many enemies. His position made him a target, and in 2023, Torres was fatally attacked at California State Prison, Sacramento, by fellow inmates. The exact reason for his death remains unclear, though his violent history and many enemies likely played a role. His death came at the hands of Ray and Juan Angel Martinez, both serving life sentences for separate crimes. Before his death, Torres had already faced significant legal challenges. He was convicted of numerous charges, including attempted manslaughter and witness tampering, which led to a sentence of 133 years to life. At the time of his passing, Torres was under indictment in federal court, charged with conspiring to traffic controlled substances in coordination with other criminal groups. Number 1. Peter Ojeda. Peter Sana. Ojeda was a towering figure in the criminal landscape of Southern California, a name that commanded both respect and fear. As one of the longest-serving and most influential members of the Mexican Mafia, Ojeda's criminal career spanned decades, leaving an indelible mark on both the streets of Orange County and the prison system. His reputation was built not just on his violent past, but on his ability to shape the Mexican Mafia into a powerful and organized force that extended its influence far beyond prison walls. Ojeda's rise to prominence within the Mexican Mafia began in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when he became a key figure in the gang's expansion. Initially focused on maintaining control over the Latino gangs inside California's state prisons, the Mexican Mafia's influence began to grow, with Ojeda at the forefront of this expansion. He was instrumental in solidifying the Mafia's control over Orange County, and by the early 1990s he was considered the undisputed leader of Latino street gangs in the region. Known as the Big Homie and the Godfather of Orange County, Ojeda's influence reached far beyond prison yards. His most notable contribution came in 1992, when he brokered a controversial meeting at El Salvador Park in Santa Ana. During this meeting, Ojeda gathered warring street gang leaders from across the county, urging them to put aside their turf battles and instead focus on collective financial gain through a taxation system. Ojeda's ability to command loyalty was unrivaled. Even while incarcerated, he continued to issue orders and manage operations. His prison term didn't diminish his grip on the streets of Southern California, and his criminal network remained intact. His influence extended well beyond his inner circle, as he effectively became a shadow leader in the criminal activities of countless street gangs. His status was such that even rivals feared his authority, and his orders were carried out without question. This control allowed him to stay at the helm of the Mexican Mafia for decades, despite numerous arrests. Ojeda's criminal activities weren't just limited to orchestrating extortion schemes. His influence also extended to orchestrating violent actions against anyone who posed a threat to the Mafia's dominance. His actions led to countless incidents involving intimidation and violence, used as tools to maintain order and loyalty within the ranks. His ability to operate a network from behind bars, using intermediaries such as his girlfriend who served as a go-between, further cemented his reputation as a dangerous figure. Despite his age, Ojeda's criminal actions didn't stop. In 2016, he was convicted once again, this time for conspiracy charges under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, along with multiple violent conspiracies. He was sentenced to 15 years, but given his age, it was widely believed that this would likely be a life sentence. Peter Sana Ojeda passed away on June 7, 2024, while incarcerated. He suffered a heart attack during an operation at a federal medical facility.